The first thing you should know is that I was not the kind of person who went looking for scary places. I was 17, and most nights I was pretty predictable. I would finish whatever homework I had left, make something to eat even if it was way too late, and sit at my desk with headphones on while I watched random videos until I realized I had school the next morning. My parents thought I went to bed around 11. I usually did not. I just got very good at making the house look quiet. My friends were the same way. We were bored more often than we were brave. There were 4 of us: me, Daniel, Marcus, and Eli. We had known each other since middle school, and by the summer before our senior year, we had developed a habit of driving around town late at night with no real destination. We would get gas, buy snacks, argue about music, and sometimes park somewhere for half an hour just because nobody wanted to go home yet. That was how we first started talking about Bellwood Cemetery. It sat on the edge of town, behind an old stone wall and a narrow road that was mostly surrounded by trees. During the day, it looked completely normal. There were old gravestones, a small maintenance building, and a large iron gate at the front entrance. Nothing about it looked especially frightening. At night, though, the place had a reputation. People said the gate sometimes opened by itself. People said lights could be seen moving between the graves after midnight. One story claimed that if you stood outside the gate at exactly 3:17 in the morning, you could hear someone walking toward you from inside the cemetery. I never believed any of that. Neither did Daniel. Daniel was actually the one who suggested we go there. It was a Friday night in late July. The weather was warm, but there was a strange amount of fog sitting low over the fields outside town. We had been driving for almost an hour when Daniel suddenly turned the car onto the road leading toward Bellwood. Marcus looked over from the passenger seat. "Why are we going here?" Daniel smiled. "Because you said there was nothing to do. Nobody had a better idea." We parked about 100 yards from the cemetery because the road became too narrow after that. There was no street light near the entrance, so once we got out of the car, the only real light came from our phone screens and the headlights. The cemetery gate was closed. That was the first thing I noticed. It was an old iron gate between 2 stone pillars. There was a chain wrapped around the middle, and a small metal sign said the cemetery closed at sunset. Daniel walked up to it and shook the bars. Nothing happened. Then he looked at us and laughed. See? Terrifying. We laughed too. At least, I did. We started walking along the outside of the wall, talking quietly because everything sounded louder than it should have in the fog. After a few minutes, Eli stopped. He was staring at the gate. "Did you guys leave it like that?" We all turned around. The chain was still there, but the gate was open. Not wide. Just enough for one person to walk through. Daniel immediately said that somebody must have opened it from the other side. That made sense. Almost everything had a normal explanation that night. Almost. We stood there for another minute before Daniel pushed the gate open a little farther. The hinges made a long, low sound. Then something inside the cemetery moved. We all heard it. A single footstep. Then another. Slow. Heavy. Coming from somewhere beyond the first row of trees. Nobody said anything. Daniel raised his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam reached between the gravestones, but there was nothing there. He laughed again, although this time it sounded forced. "Probably an animal." Marcus nodded. "Probably. We should have left then. Instead, we went inside. I remember looking at the time on my phone as we passed through the gate. It was 2:48 in the morning. I remember that, because 29 minutes later, everything changed. And I remember the exact time, because after that night, I could never look at 3:17 in the morning the same way again. We should have gone back to the car. I know that now. But when you are 17 and standing in a cemetery with 3 friends, common sense tends to lose a fight against curiosity. We kept walking. Daniel went first because he had been the one who suggested coming inside. Marcus stayed a few steps behind him, holding his phone up like a flashlight. Eli and I walked together near the back. The cemetery was much larger than it looked from the road. The entrance opened into a wide gravel path, but after about 50 yards, the path split into smaller trails between the graves. Some of the headstones were new and clean. Others were so old that we could barely read the names. The fog had become thicker inside the cemetery. It was not covering everything. It just seemed to hang between the trees and the stones, almost at waist level. Every now and then, our phone lights would catch something white in the distance, and for half a second I would think someone was standing there. It was always a headstone. At least, that was what I told myself. Daniel kept making jokes. He would point at an old grave and invent ridiculous stories about the person buried there. Marcus kept telling him to shut up. Eli was quieter than usual. I eventually asked him what was wrong. He pointed behind us. I turned around. The gate was still visible through the fog. It looked farther away than it should have. That was the first thing that bothered me. We had only walked for a few minutes, but the gate looked like it was at the end of a long field. The 2 stone pillars were barely visible. Maybe we walked farther than we thought, Daniel said. Nobody argued. We continued. A few minutes later, we found a small maintenance shed. It was nothing special. A low concrete building with a metal door and a single dirty window. There was an old wooden sign beside it warning people not to enter. Daniel immediately walked toward it. Marcus grabbed his shoulder. No. Daniel looked back. What? We are not breaking into a cemetery building. Daniel laughed. I was just looking. He turned away from the door. That was when Eli noticed the ground. There were footprints in the dirt. Fresh ones. They came from the maintenance shed and crossed the path directly in front of us. They were not animal tracks. They looked like shoes. One set. Someone had been walking through the cemetery recently. We followed the footprints with our eyes. They disappeared behind a row of tall bushes. Daniel stopped smiling. Maybe the caretaker is here. That should have made us feel better. It did not, because the cemetery was supposed to be locked. And if the caretaker was here, why had nobody answered when we had called out? We stood there listening. Nothing. Then the metal door behind us moved. Just slightly. A soft scrape came from the shed. Everyone turned. The door had opened about an inch. Daniel whispered, "Did you touch that?" Marcus shook his head. Nobody had. Daniel took a step toward it. I told him not to. He ignored me. The door opened another few inches. There was no wind. I knew that because the trees around us were completely still. Daniel stopped. Then a sound came from inside the shed. Not a voice, more like something small hitting the floor. Clink. We all jumped. Marcus whispered that we should leave. This time Daniel agreed. We turned around and started walking back. The problem was that we could not see the gate anymore. The fog had thickened while we were standing there. I opened the map on my phone, but the location kept jumping around. The little blue arrow pointed in one direction, then another. Eli tried his phone. Same thing. No signal, he said. Mine showed 1 bar, then none. We picked the widest path and followed it, assuming it would eventually lead back to the entrance. For about 5 minutes, everything was quiet. Then I heard footsteps behind us. I stopped. Everyone else stopped too. The footsteps stopped. Daniel looked at me. "You heard that?" I nodded. We waited. Nothing. Then the footsteps started again. 3 steps. Pause. 3 steps. Pause. They were not close enough to see whoever was making them, but they were getting closer. Marcus said we should run. Nobody argued. We started moving faster. The footsteps followed. They never became a run. That was the worst part. They stayed slow and steady behind us, matching our direction as if whoever was back there knew exactly where we were. We turned left. The footsteps turned left. We turned right. They turned right. Then we reached a small clearing. In the middle of it stood an old stone monument surrounded by dead flowers. There was a wooden bench beside it, and sitting on that bench was a person. All 4 of us stopped. The figure was facing away from us. It looked like an older man wearing a dark jacket. Daniel called out, "Sir?" The figure did not move. Daniel tried again. "Are you the caretaker?" Still nothing. Marcus whispered that we should leave. Daniel took 1 step forward. The figure slowly turned its head. I could not see the face clearly, but I could see enough. It was pale, and the eyes seemed to be looking directly at us. Then the figure stood. Nobody spoke. It walked away from the bench and disappeared behind the monument. Daniel ran after it. We shouted at him to stop. He did not. He disappeared around the other side. Then we heard him yell. Not a joke, not a scared laugh, a real shout. We ran after him. Daniel was standing beside the monument, staring at the ground. There was nobody there, no caretaker, no stranger, nothing. But there was something else. A small metal plaque had been attached to the stone. Daniel pointed at it. The plaque had one name engraved on it. Daniel read it aloud. Then he went completely silent, because the name belonged to his grandfather. Daniel had never told us his grandfather was buried at Bellwood. He had never even mentioned having family there, but the name was unmistakable. Marcus looked at him. Is that your grandfather? Daniel shook his head. No. His voice sounded different. I stepped closer to the plaque. There was a date underneath the name. It was not an old date. It was only 8 years earlier. Daniel stared at it for several seconds. Then he said something that made all of us look at him. My grandfather is still alive. We heard a noise behind us. This time it was not footsteps. It was the cemetery gate. Somewhere in the distance, metal slammed against metal. We turned toward the sound. Through the fog, we could finally see the entrance. The gate was closing. Slowly, by itself, Daniel ran. We followed. The gravel path seemed to stretch forever, and the gate kept moving while we ran toward it. Then my phone vibrated. I looked down. The screen showed the time, 3:17 in the morning. Underneath the time was a notification from an unknown number. There was no message, just a photograph. I opened it. The picture showed the four of us standing beside the monument. It had been taken from behind. And in the photograph, there was someone standing directly behind me. I turned around. Nobody was there. Then Eli screamed. He was pointing at the gate. The chain had wrapped itself around the bars, and something was standing on the other side. It looked exactly like the figure from the clearing, except this time, it was facing us, and it was smiling. None of us moved. The figure stood on the other side of the gate, maybe 20 feet away. The fog drifted around its legs, making it hard to tell exactly where the ground ended and the fog began. Daniel whispered, "That is him." Marcus looked at him. "Who?" "My grandfather." I thought he was joking. He was not. Daniel's face had gone completely pale. He kept staring through the bars. "My grandfather died 8 years ago," he said. I reminded him that he had just told us his grandfather was alive. He shook his head. I lied. The figure lifted one hand, not a wave, just a slow movement, like it was pointing at something behind us. We turned around. There was nothing there. When we looked back, the figure was closer. None of us had seen it move. It was now standing only a few feet from the gate. Daniel backed away. The figure reached through the bars, its fingers wrapped around the iron. Then it said Daniel's name, not loudly, almost like someone calling from another room. Daniel froze. The rest of us knew immediately that he recognized the voice. "My grandfather used to say my name like that," he whispered. Marcus grabbed Daniel's arm. "We are leaving." He pulled him toward the side of the cemetery wall. The main gate was locked, and the chain had somehow tightened around it. We could not find where the chain began or ended. It was simply wrapped around the bars several times, as though somebody had just secured it from the outside. We ran along the wall looking for another exit. The cemetery had to have one. There was always a service entrance somewhere. We found one after about a minute. It was a narrow metal gate hidden behind a row of bushes. Marcus grabbed it. Locked. Daniel kicked the bottom of it. Nothing. Then we heard the footsteps again. 3 steps. Pause. 3 steps. Pause. They were inside the cemetery now. We all turned. The figure was walking toward us. Slowly. It did not hurry. It did not need to. Daniel started pulling at the service gate again. "Come on." Eli was looking over his shoulder. "It is getting closer." Marcus shouted at him to help. All 4 of us grabbed the gate. We pulled together. The lock suddenly snapped. The gate swung open so hard that it nearly hit Marcus. We stumbled through and ran. We did not stop until we reached the road. The cemetery disappeared behind the trees. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Daniel said, Where's my phone? He checked his pockets. Nothing. He had dropped it somewhere inside. Marcus told him to forget it. Daniel refused. He said there were pictures of his family on it. He started walking back. I grabbed his shoulder. Absolutely not. He looked at me. You do not understand. I understand enough. Then something happened that made all of us stop. Daniel's phone rang. We could hear it from inside the cemetery. The ringtone echoed through the trees. Daniel stared toward the gate. The phone kept ringing. Then it stopped. A second later, it rang again. This time the sound was much closer. We could hear it just beyond the wall. Daniel took a step forward. Marcus blocked him. Then the ringing stopped again. A voice came from inside. Daniel's voice. It said, "Come get your phone." Nobody moved. The voice repeated itself. It sounded exactly like Daniel. Same tone. Same little hesitation between the words. Daniel started crying. Not loudly. He just stood there with tears running down his face. "I never told you guys," he said. We were all listening. "My grandfather died here." Marcus asked what he meant. Daniel wiped his face. He was the caretaker. That explained the building, the footprints, the old stories. But it did not explain the figure. Daniel told us his grandfather had disappeared from the cemetery one night when Daniel was 9. The family was told that he had left work and never came home. There had been a search, but nobody found him. Daniel had always believed he had died somewhere nearby. His family never talked about it. Then Daniel looked at the cemetery. He used to tell me one thing. "What? Never come here after midnight." Marcus stared at him. "You knew that before tonight?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah." Nobody said anything after that. We started walking toward the car. We were maybe 50 yards away when my phone vibrated again. I looked down. Another unknown number. Another photograph. This one showed the 4 of us standing beside the car. The picture had clearly been taken from inside the cemetery. I zoomed in. There was something near the gate. The figure was standing behind the bars. But that was not what scared me. There was another person standing beside it. A little boy. I could not see his face. Daniel looked at the picture. Then he whispered, "That is me." He recognized the jacket. It was a picture from his childhood. His parents had taken it years ago. But the photograph on my phone was different. The little boy was standing beside the cemetery gate, and behind him stood the same figure. Daniel's phone suddenly rang again. This time, it was coming from the car. We looked inside. His phone was sitting on the driver's seat. None of us had put it there. Daniel walked toward the car. Marcus told him not to. Daniel ignored him. He opened the driver's door. The phone stopped ringing. The screen lit up. There was one new message. Daniel picked it up. He read it silently. Then he dropped the phone. I asked him what it said. He did not answer. So I looked. The message contained only one sentence. "Your grandfather is waiting at the gate." Daniel backed away from the car. Then the headlights turned on. Nobody was inside. The engine remained off, but the headlights were shining directly toward the cemetery. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the gate moved. It opened, all by itself. The road between us and the cemetery was completely empty. But we could hear someone walking toward us. Slow steps on gravel. One, then another, then another. Daniel grabbed the car door. "Get in." We did. He started the engine. The footsteps stopped. We drove away without looking back. For the first few minutes, nobody spoke. Then Marcus asked Daniel to check the time. Daniel looked at the dashboard clock. It said 3:17. He stared at it. Then he looked at his phone. It also said 3:17. I checked mine. 3:17. We drove for what felt like 10 minutes. The clock did not change. Then Daniel whispered something. "Look behind us." I did. The road was empty, but the cemetery gate was still visible. It should have been far behind us. Instead, it looked exactly the same distance away. Daniel kept driving. The gate remained there. Every turn we made, it was there. Every road we took, it appeared behind us. Nobody understood how. Then Eli pointed ahead. "There, A road sign appeared through the fog. We were back at the cemetery entrance. We had somehow driven in a complete circle. Daniel slammed on the brakes. The car stopped, and through the windshield we saw the gate. It was open. Standing in the middle of the entrance was the figure. Beside it stood the little boy from the photograph. The boy raised his hand. He pointed directly at Daniel. Then the figure leaned toward him and whispered something. We could not hear the words, but Daniel did. He opened the car door. Marcus grabbed him. Daniel fought back. He kept saying the same thing. He wants me to come home. We held him inside the car until he finally stopped struggling. Then, without warning, every light inside the cemetery went out. The fog disappeared, and for the first time that night, we could see the entire cemetery clearly. There was nobody at the gate, nobody on the road, nothing, except Daniel's phone. It was lying on the ground outside the car. The screen was still glowing. A new photograph had appeared. It showed us sitting inside the car. The picture had been taken from the back seat, and behind Daniel's head, barely visible in the darkness, was the face of an old man. His eyes were open, and he was looking directly at me. Nobody looked behind the seats. Not after seeing that photograph. Daniel started the car again, and this time the engine turned over immediately. He pressed the accelerator and drove as fast as he safely could. We did not talk. The road finally changed. The fog disappeared. The cemetery was gone. We reached town a few minutes later, and the first gas station we passed was still open. Daniel pulled in and parked under the lights. For a while, we just sat there. Nobody wanted to be the first person to say what we had seen. Eventually, Marcus got out and walked inside to buy water. Eli followed him. I stayed in the car with Daniel. He was staring at the steering wheel. I asked him if he was okay. He shook his head. Then he said something I still remember. "I do not think that was my grandfather." I asked why. Daniel looked at me. Because my grandfather was buried somewhere else. I did not understand. He explained that his family had searched for his grandfather after he disappeared. Years later, they officially declared him dead. His parents had eventually held a memorial service, but there had never been a body. Daniel had lied earlier because he was embarrassed. There was no grave. There was no confirmed burial. And yet we had seen his grandfather's name on a plaque inside Bellwood Cemetery. I asked him about the photograph on my phone. He said he had never seen it before. We checked the picture again. The little boy really was Daniel. The jacket matched. The face matched. But there was something else in the background. A small metal sign. We zoomed in. The sign had a number on it. 317. Daniel stared at the screen. Then his phone rang. We all froze. The call was coming from an unknown number. Daniel did not answer. It rang until it stopped. A message appeared. There was no text. Just another photograph. This one showed the cemetery gate. The gate was closed. Daniel's grandfather was standing beside it. The little boy was gone. We stared at the image for several seconds. Then Marcus noticed something. There is a date. He pointed to the bottom corner. The photograph had been taken that night, but the date underneath was 8 years earlier. Nobody knew what to say. We decided to go home. Our parents were furious when we arrived, but none of us told them what happened. We made up a story about getting lost while driving around. For the next few days, everything seemed normal. Then Daniel stopped coming to school. His mother said he was sick. 2 days later, he returned. He looked exhausted. He would not talk about the cemetery. None of us did either. We agreed to delete every photograph and never go back. I deleted mine. Marcus deleted his. Eli did too. Daniel said he had deleted everything. That should have been the end of it. It was not. About 3 weeks later, I was cleaning out old pictures on my phone. I found one photograph I had never seen before. It was from that night. I opened it. It showed the cemetery gate. Nothing unusual at first. Then I noticed 4 figures standing inside the cemetery. Daniel, Marcus, Eli, and me. We were standing several feet apart. The photograph had been taken from outside the gate. But I knew exactly where we had been standing when the picture was supposedly taken. We had been near the monument, not at the gate. I zoomed in. There was another figure behind us, the old man, but he was not looking at the camera. He was looking toward the gate, and beside him was the little boy, Daniel. Except the boy was not wearing the jacket from the earlier photograph. He was wearing the same clothes Daniel had been wearing that night. I called Daniel immediately. He answered after one ring. I asked if he had received the picture. There was a long silence. Then he said, "You found it too." I asked what he meant. He told me he had received the same photograph that morning. But there was one difference. In his version, the four of us were standing outside the cemetery, and the old man was standing inside. I asked him what that meant. He said he did not know. Then he told me something else. His mother had found an old box belonging to his grandfather. Inside was a notebook. Most of it was ordinary. Names, dates, maintenance records, but the final page contained one sentence. Daniel read it to me over the phone. He said his grandfather had written, "If the gate is open at 3:17, do not let anyone inside." I asked him what came after that. Daniel was quiet. Then he said there was another sentence underneath. It had been written in different handwriting. The sentence said, "If they are already inside, do not let them out." I never went back to Bellwood Cemetery. Neither did Marcus or Eli. As far as I know, the gate is still there, still locked, still standing behind those two old stone pillars. But there is one thing I have never been able to explain. Every year, on the same night we went there, my phone shows a notification at 3:17 in the morning. There is never a message, never a phone number, just one photograph. The first year, it showed the cemetery gate. The second year, it showed the monument. Last year, it showed the road outside the cemetery. And this year, I am honestly afraid to find out what it will show, because the last photograph had something different in it. The gate was open. The old man was standing inside, and someone was standing on the road outside. It was me, except the photograph had been taken from behind me, and whoever took it was standing close enough that I could see their shadow reaching across the ground. I still have not looked at the photograph again. I do not know who is taking them. I do not know why the time is always 3:17. And I definitely do not know what happened to Daniel's grandfather. But I know one thing. If you ever find yourself driving past Bellwood Cemetery late at night, and you see that iron gate standing open, keep driving. Do not stop. Do not get out. And whatever you do, do not look at the time. Because if it says 3:17 in the morning, you may already be on the wrong side of the gate.